Blessings to everyone today, and thank you for joining me. It's a real honor that I get to speak with Father Peter. Heers, I'm sure most of you know, well, people that are Orthodox, I'm sure know who he is, and maybe some of you who are not Orthodox probably do too as well. So thank you for joining me, Father Peter.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be on your show now. We had you on ours, and now I'm
Yeah,
on yours. So may it all be to the glory of God and help our brothers and sisters in
I,
some way.
I hope so. I appreciate you taking the time too. Let me introduce real quick why maybe I'm well, this is kind of the topic that I do the most often because I figure, uh, discuss what you know. So the sort of the general topic today is ministering to LGBT people. I hate that that acronym, but people with same-sex attraction or people with identity issues. Um, how I got interested in the topic, first of all, was, probably when, I don't know, probably when I was, hate to be blunt, but when I was molested by a Catholic priest when I was a kid. uh, he had a certain MO that he used, and before he did it, he had said that, I was born gay, and he was using all this lingo, and God made me gay. And he didn't say so much I was born gay that I can recall, but he did say that God had made me gay, and I started hearing that. And then later on, when that sort of brainwashing worked, and later on when I did identify as gay and I was in San Francisco, there was a Catholic parish right in the Castro, which is the gay neighborhood. And at that time, I was understandably, I wasn't interested in organized religion at all. And but I knew that particular Catholic parish was very gay affirming. They had, these so-called pride masses, and then they had different ministries for people with AIDS, which, you could argue was a very good thing. And but then they also had gay same-sex marriage. I guess you could call them blessings, but I went to a couple of these things, and looking back, I could say they were actually sort of, weddings. So I noticed all that going on, and then in 1999, Father, I came. I know it's kind of crazy, but I wanted to leave that life for a lot of reasons, and I thought the best way maybe to do that, or facilitate me leaving that life, was through the Catholic Church. So I did talk to a Catholic priest at that point, and he kind of gave me the same sort of line that the priest that had molested me was that, God had made you gay, and, that wasn't a bad thing, and that, you needed to work sort of your Christianity through that framework. And his idea of that was that gay people should, seek out a monogamous relationship with someone of the same sex. Um, but I had already done all that. So this was sort of the Catholic Church that I found. Being Sicilian and very stubborn, I stayed in the Catholic Church, Father, for 20 years after that, and really tried, um, because I have to say, on paper, Father, and we talked about this in the podcast we did with you. On paper, the Catholic Church is, quite good on the gay issue if you read the Catechism of the Catholic Church, but pastorally, what I mean is what takes place in parishes is it's kind of all over the place. And in the places where it counts, where a parish where you have a lot of, or you could have a lot of gay people because it's near an area where they live, it's usually very, very gay affirming. And I within the Catholic Church, I tried to work on that, and it just didn't. It just didn't. It didn't. It didn't. I didn't. It didn't bear fruit. I don't think it did. So, I ended up leaving and coming to Roman
Can I ask a question?
Orthodoxy.
Yeah,
Go
thanks be
ahead.
to God. But I
Go ahead.
want to before you, I want don't lose your train of thought. But I want to ask a question. So you encounter these priests who have clearly had a total chasm and break from the teaching. I mean, they knew when they told you that you were born or you were made that way, that that wasn't the teaching of their own church, right? They were so what do you think? Why were they doing that? Why were they departing from 2,000 years of teaching and without a blink of an eye? They just didn't believe it anymore, or they thought they were nuancing it, or what do you think?
I, that's, yeah. I think that, well, first of all, I would say that about 50% of Catholic priests are homosexual and or gay. And what I mean by that is that they identify as gay, maybe not publicly. I'd say a lot of them do not, but they also, their sympathies are very gay affirming. Um, so they probably, and a lot of them are in gay relationships as well, usually with other priests. And
I mean, this is a
so,
this is a terrible way to live. I mean, you're totally at odds with with everything that you're supposed to be, that you're called to be, that you say you are. I can't understand how
well, I
why
don't.
would right? I mean, isn't that or am I wrong on that?
No, you're not wrong. I think that in their head, I think they've kind of self-brainwashed themselves because when we take a little deeper dive with you into this, because I think it's seeping into Orthodoxy too, there's sort of
Hmm.
this whole sort of queer theology that goes with it that um, it reinterprets everything. So it reinterprets the Bible. It if what they would say about the catechism of the Catholic Church is, I guess they would just say it's wrong. They would argue that scripture, teaching, and tradition sort of doesn't uphold that interpretation.
Okay.
I mean,
Wow.
to you and I, that sounds kind of crazy, but they've convinced themselves of that.
Right. Right. Okay. I don't want to take you away from your
No,
introduction, but
that was
I want
actually it. That was actually it,
to.
Father.
Okay. Okay.
So that's kind of why, I'm here, and I asked you to let me interview you because I did that podcast with you, and I go, well, Father is willing to talk about this subject that a lot of priests, are uncomfortable with. I mean, certainly among Catholic priests, if you just look at my podcast history, I couldn't get many Catholic priests at all. I think there's just a couple. Now, in Orthodoxy, I found a lot more that are
Mhm.
willing to talk about it, maybe because it's not such an issue in Orthodoxy. Um, but
I think it's much more limited from what you just described of the reality in America, even in American Orthodoxy, which, you know, is definitely not the norm. If you go across the Orthodox world to the old country, Romania, Greece, Serbia, America's an anomaly. People think we're maybe that's not the case, but my experience of living 20 years in Greece and spending a good amount of time traveling in Serbia and Romania, at least, a lot of things we you see on the ground in American Orthodoxy do not exist, or it's we got some unique problems. So even though having said that, it's not really. I have never encountered serious problems. Now I hear about it now. I'm starting to hear about it in this parish over there and that parish over there. So I think there is definitely it's on the rise in the last 10 years, but I've been Orthodox 30 years and I cannot say that in the first 20, 25 years, of course I was in Greece a lot of the time, but I don't remember encountering any serious issues or problems or people in terms of teaching, in terms of like this chasm that you're describing of like the Orthodox teaching and the Orthodox way. I think it's a new thing and I think it needs to be addressed. Absolutely.
yeah, I haven't seen that either. I have an interesting little anecdote story, Father, when here in San Francisco. So when I talked to an Orthodox priest, because after I had decided to leave Catholicism, I was because I couldn't take it anymore. I had always leaned towards Orthodoxy, probably the last 20 years. And I went to go talk to an Orthodox priest because I was sort of debating whether to be Orthodox or just to be like a home home Christian. I don't know, just sort of practice my Christianity at home and not be part of an organized religion. So I talked I talked to the priest and I said, this wasn't the reason that I became Orthodox. It's a lot more complex. I love the theology, I love the culture, I love the artwork and everything. But I said, Father, am I ever going to see a rainbow banner inside this church? And he said, over my dead body. I said,
Hmm.
okay, okay, I'm in, Father.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say most priests would say the same thing in a heartbeat.
No,
Um,
no, no, no Catholic priest in San Francisco could give me that guarantee.
we just did a podcast last night on our show about the deaconesses, there's a small vocal minority of, I don't know what to call them, East Coast intellectuals maybe or something, but who are saying we need to reintroduce deaconesses, which I guess is not really all that controversial in the West, but for Orthodoxy would be
Mm.
a major break with about a 800 to 1,000 year tradition that these deaconesses have not existed. But somebody asked in the stream, do you think we'll see priestesses in the Orthodox Church? And the answer from both of us was absolutely not. I can't imagine it. And if it happens, these people won't be Orthodox anymore. So I think it's the same thing, but much more um, in terms of, what'd you say, a gay pride flag or something outside of the church
Inside. Well, I wouldn't want
inside.
it outside
Yeah.
either.
Now there are people who are on their way out of Orthodoxy who are espousing that or pushing that or at least abetting that, but they're clearly recognized, at least in my circles and most of Orthodox people I know, as on their way out or out of Orthodoxy, even though they might be wearing the cassock still. I mean, they don't represent Orthodoxy, and everybody knows it. So yeah, that's the reality right now. We'll see. I mean, anything's possible. People are free. People are free to apostatize and people are free to innovate, and church has to deal with that as it always has for 2,000 years. But uh, so far, that's where we're at.
Yeah, the only thing that concerns me is because the gay affirmation stuff in Roman Catholicism began as more of a fringe movement on the periphery. And of course, I mean,
Sure.
because now they're blessing same-sex unions, it's not. So the only thing that worries me about Orthodoxy is like maybe you guys are 20 or 30 years behind the Catholic Church because it seems like now it's more fringe in Orthodoxy, but it's possible for it to move to the center. I hope not. But
I would say it really depends on the base, the faithful, the culture. I mean, there will be apostasies, there will be hierarchs and theologians
yeah.
who will espouse variety. There's no question about that. That shouldn't phase us. But again, if you go to I mean, Orthodoxy, the base of Orthodoxy is not America, it's not England, it's not France, it's the old world. We would, at least as much as the old world has remained old today, but it's not really, it's an anomaly, a very small minority among practicing Orthodox Christians in all of the old countries, in my experience. So I would say that, maybe in America, you feel like we're 20 years behind on some public relations level or some, theologian discussion level. But in reality, the culture, the reality of the spiritual life among most Orthodox Christians, now we're a minority, even in traditional Orthodox countries, if we want to be honest. I mean, practicing Orthodox Christians are a small minority because of secularization. But those are the people who still, I mean, just yesterday, I don't know if you saw that the Greek Orthodox hierarchy unanimously rejected and voted against this effort on the part of the politicians to introduce
Mhm.
into law the recognition of gay marriage. And so unanimously, the hierarchy said we oppose it. There was no, if there, and that there may be, I'm sure there are people who are even in the hierarchy who are struggling with this problem, this spiritual problem, but they don't have anywhere near the boldness to say, oh, I'm for it. I mean, they'd be ostracized and would be a very tiny minority among among the hierarchy, let alone the faithful. So I
Yeah.
don't think we're that close if you put that in the mix, right?
Okay.
But if you take
Okay.
that out and you say, let's just look at American Orthodoxy, yeah, we might be a lot further along than we think.
Thank God. Okay, I'm going to share my screen with you, Father. Let's get into this right away. Um, let's see. Can you see that, Father?
So I see, yes, public orthodoxy, huh?
Okay. Are you familiar with this? I wasn't super familiar with this particular website, but I was familiar with the is it called the Orthodox? What's the group at Fordham? The Fordhamites, they call them.
Orthodox Christian Study Center up in the right-hand corner there. That's what the it's a study center
Okay.
at Fordham and yeah.
So this website or page, because I was reading, is somehow funded by that group. And correct? But
Most of their funding is not coming from the church to my knowledge. I might be wrong, but that's my to my knowledge what I've seen in publicized is that they're getting funding from the usual innovative centers,
okay.
which is indicative, I think, of what's happening.
Okay. And so for people that aren't familiar, this where is it, darn it? This Orthodox Christian Study Center is located at Fordham, which is a Jesuit, owned and operated university. It's there they're in the Bronx, I guess, in New York City. And Fordham, well, the Jesuits in general, well, whenever I go down one of these Catholic gay rat holes, whenever I start researching this stuff, there's always a Jesuit. So they're very much at the center in Roman Catholicism, at least, of all of this gay affirmation. So it wasn't surprising to me that the Jesuits aren't satisfied with destroying Catholicism. Now they want to destroy Orthodoxy as well. So they're funding this think tank uh, for Orthodox Christians, and they're advocating pretty much the same thing that the Jesuits are advocating in Roman Catholicism, which is a lot of gay inclusion. I did watch this particular video, and I wanted to get Father's reaction, a couple things, because it supposedly is talking about ministry among LGBTQ Orthodox faithful. So I was kind of interested, and I was like, well, what are they espousing? How are they going to minister to people that have same-sex attraction or have gender identity issues? So I watched this hour and a half presentation. I assume it was at Fordham. Didn't, it wasn't, it was a lot of anecdotes. It was a lot of feel goodism. It was a lot of love, unicorns and rainbows, I wrote. There wasn't, I didn't see them making any particular recommendations. So we have a priest, Orthodox priest here. He has a gay son. In my estimation, it kind of disqualifies him from being on this panel because he's not impartial. He's a gay son. Um, I've seen the same. This is the same exact program that they've used in the Catholic Church. They bring out somebody with a gay child. It's not a priest, of course, but it's usually a lay person with a gay kid. And then they bring a gay person out who's this young lady. And then they bring a gay theologian out who is this person. And then this guy's another Orthodox priest who's very gay affirming. So it's people who are not impartial. They don't bring somebody like me onto the panel. So so this Catholic, this Orthodox priest, he could be Catholic. This Orthodox priest here, he was talking about homosexuality not being a choice. I did not agree with his linguistically, I don't agree with his presentation because he starts referring to queer people, LGBTQ people, and it's kind of like, well, what gives him the right to label people in a certain way? So he's talking about gay kids, which was very strange, and he starts talking about then he got into the trans issue, and one of the things that was really sadistically disgusting, I can't remember which one of these people said it, but um, they were making the argument that priests in the Orthodox Church having gay children was sort of the impetus for change in the church. And they were saying that, well, I hope more priests have gay kids. I thought that was very sick because, number one, people aren't born that way. Even if they were, why would you wish that? It was, I thought it was a really sick comment to make. So let me set up where I want Father to
Did you
give.
sense at all watching the video that any of them were trying to present the patristic teaching, the therapeutic method of healing, the consensus of the saints on what this is
No,
and how to interpret the scriptural passages or any of that?
no,
Yeah.
no, no,
Right
not a,
there, at that point, we've departed from an Orthodox methodology. We've departed from,
no, no.
I mean, orthodoxy is orthodoxy, and today it exists because our predecessors and our fathers and our mothers followed the saints, followed the holy fathers, and tried to conform their lives to the art to the prototype and to the little Christs that have come down to us, and in our day they become their disciples. I mean, none of that is on the radar. So immediately, everybody who's an Orthodox Christian should say, "Red lights. There's something wrong here. They've departed from. If you depart from the way, you're going to depart from the truth.
Yeah,
So if you're not even beginning to try to do Orthodox, I mean, present Orthodoxy as the fathers, the saints of all ages, especially of our day, have presented. If that's not what you're doing, I don't even, there's no point even sitting and listening to you. You have nothing to offer. Your particular experiences and views are really not of interest to us. I mean, why do you care what I say? Who am I? Do I have some kind of authority because I'm a priest? Well, to a certain degree, but not really, unless I'm following the saints and following the Holy Father. So I think it's very indicative right there before we even get into what they say from an Orthodox perspective on what's important and why we should listen to somebody. They're disqualified.
yeah, I agree. And the place that particularly the priests were coming from was about their experiences of having gay children, gay relatives, gay friends. I think this is because they do it in the Catholic Church as well. It's a bad place to begin because I'm just saying with people I know that had addictions or other problems in their life that involved enabling. I never saw worse enablers than family and friends. So
Yeah.
it's usually it's not a good place to begin because like I said, they're not impartial. They're and also the issue with homosexuality as well is that I'll get into it in a minute. There's a very large family dynamic involved in homosexuality, and it often involves abuse and neglect. So you're going to the parents of a gay child, um, or the family. They are invested deeply because I think there's also things that they would like to hide or not
Hmm.
deal with. Because I've seen it with I don't want to call him Father, with the Jesuit James Martin. Is that I used to go to some of his talks, and one of the things I was interested in is like, well, who's here? Who's at the church to listen to him? And the demographic was older Catholics with a gay kid, usually a gay son. And I go, well, James Martin is telling them everything that they want to hear. You had nothing to do with your child being gay. They were made that way and born that way. They were made by God and born that way. So right away, it gets them off the hook. So any sort of guilt or self-examination that parent needs to do about, well, how did I contribute to this is off the table.
Yeah,
And
and I would just dovetail with that and say that if usually someone's going to be covering or supporting or whatever however you want to describe it for a passion because they
Yeah.
themselves have not been cured.
Yeah.
So if we're going to talk, about things, if we're going to present our own views and experiences, we better have been cured of it. Otherwise, it's like it's just not, it's not gonna be
E-
helpful. It's not gonna be
Exactly.
therapeutic. So
Exactly.
maybe that's part of what's going on. Like you said, they themselves are suffering from passions they're not seeing, and then they're trying to examine another, passion that's been that's become an addiction. It's become something that's they're identifying as. I mean, that's the other thing I wanted to say earlier was we identify as Christians, which means we've been restored to the image,
Hmm.
and we're in the process of
Hmm.
going to the likeness. So we identify as being made in the image and likeness and being children of God. We don't identify as anything else. I don't identify as, ultimately everything else is very, very secondary, tertiary, and it's of this world, whether I'm an American or a Serbian and then now we have people identifying their being with homosexuality or gender. I mean, this is far from what Christ has brought us and given us. Like, so just it tells you how far we are from what the gospel has given us. Like, neither Greek nor Jew. I mean, Christ is all in all in the church. That's our identity. So can we say my identity is Christ and then turn and say I affirm a distortion, a perversion, a result of the fall? That's my identity. I'm Christian. In other words, Christ is my all in all, and my identity is that which is inconsistent with Christ. It doesn't make any sense.
Hmm. I agree. Let's see, I'm gonna put the audio on. Okay.
For gay kids. So this is not going away. It's not going away. So we have to begin listening and having meaningful and open conversations about the reality of the many, many LGBTQ plus people who are our brothers and sisters in Orthodoxy. And acknowledge that these are faithful people with active prayer lives and serious spiritual maturity who want to engage in the life of the church and who are really struggling and traumatized with the messages from the church that signal rejection, which signals to them that the church is not listening. They're
Hmm.
Well, okay. What about what he's saying there about uh people being traumatized by I don't mean to laugh, but he's saying that LGBT people are traumatized by what they hear in church. I wrote something down here, and the church shouldn't necessarily make you feel safe. I mean, that's not the job of religion, is to make you feel safe. Because I think one of the things that they're advocating here, because I was trying to figure out what is their ministry, because this is called ministry among LGBTQ Orthodox faithful. What's the ministry? I think what they want to do is they want to set up a place, a safe place in a church where people can feel comfortable about their sexuality and coming out. So, if they don't have that, they feel traumatized. But I don't think it's religion or Christianity's job to make you feel safe. I mean,
If I go to the doctor and I have a serious illness, and the doctor tells me, I hate to break the news, but you've got cancer, or you've got, whatever degree you want to give it to it. Is the doctor traumatizing me, or is he telling me what I need to hear in order for me to begin the process of healing? Now, if
exactly.
there are impassioned people who are angry and are rejecting repentant sinners, then that's a serious problem. They have a passion, they're not being healed. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think they're talking about they want to change the message of the church, because they're saying that for whatever reason, this is not a passion. This is given to them from the get-go, and we've got to recognize this as this can be reconciled with a life in Christ. And as it seems like
Yeah.
I didn't hear the whole lecture, so I'm assuming it, since you did, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but
Hmm.
that he's saying, look, we accept them as is. They don't have to cease the activities or even
He'll
theory, like the theory is also acceptable
he'll
that
he'll talk
these
more
things
about
are,
that.
yeah, go ahead.
But I wanted to reference this really quick too. This is um this is from a website, the Russian Orthodox Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. And they have a really good article. It's quite long, but I liked, let me see if I can highlight it.
You know who the author is? I don't see an author.
I wish I did, because I thank them. So this is really interesting, this paragraph right here. It says the change in attitudes presents an array of challenges as we seek to live our lives as Christians in some respects. The issues we have are similar to those of our brethren in late classical antiquity. On the other hand, for them, the norms of pagan sexuality represented a long prevailing status quo for which the church was proclaiming a revolutionary alternative for us. A revolutionary alternative. For us, we face a newly remade moral landscape, and one which, far from being static, is evolving rapidly as it is driven forward by powerful social and political forces. What I thought was interesting about the paragraph that he was, you know, comparing our time to those in the early Christians during the pagan period, because Christianity, like he says, was proclaiming a revolutionary alternative to the status quo. But it seems like on this panel, Christianity is not a revolutionary alternative. It just should be a safe place where people can come out and be gay. So
Yes. If you're coming to the church to be affirmed in your passions or in your fallenness, you came to the wrong place. It's not it's a hospital, and hospitals are curing people. Sometimes there's invasive surgeries. Sometimes there's very painful, long process of purification and healing and all the rest. I mean, so this language that the priest was using does not remind me of the church as a hospital. It's more like the church as a affirming, safe place that is going to have a kind of love that is, it doesn't remind us of the sacrificial love of the cross or the ascetic love, right? Asceticism, as I said many times, is an expression of our love for Christ, and we engage in it. We live out our life ascetically, struggling against the passions because we love Christ, but also because that's how He's deigned for us to be healed and restored to Him. I mean, so if we're going to turn away from that, which is what you would have to do to accept that the status, that it's reconcilable, a homosexual lifestyle, affirming the same-sex attraction, all that, that's, you can, if you try to reconcile that, you're going to have to turn away from the ascetic struggle. You're going to have to turn away from denying the passions. You're going to have to turn away from that which is contrary to nature, let alone contrary to that which we're called above nature.
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't sound orthodox to me, the language that he's using.
Let's carry on here.
They're not listening to that undeniable reality of their desire and need for an intimate relationship with someone of the same sex. And this desire that they have for love and intimacy and sex is just as natural for them as it is for straight people who seek the opposite sex.
Oh, yeah, that's just outrageous. I don't know where to begin with that. It's amazing that an Orthodox priest said that. It's totally contrary to everything we've been taught and the fathers have taught and St. Paul teaches. How does he state that with a straight face? This is the same cognitive dissonance we talked about earlier that I cannot get my head around. How can you, as an Orthodox priest and everything you've been taught, stand and teach exactly the opposite of what the fathers have said about this passion?
Yeah.
As if that which has been blessed by God, ordained by God for the continuation of the race in marriage, in that context, he's equating it with that which is contrary to nature, not been blessed, and equating them and including the word sex. So he's definitely saying here that the whole action, not just the desire, not just the thought, not just the theory, but the actions are totally to be accepted and embraced, and this is a
I,
natural desire and all the rest. I mean, it's just it's unbelievable to
I,
hear.
I wrote the quote down. This desire that they have for love and intimacy and sex is just as natural for them as it is for straight people. And I mean, he could kind of weasel his way out of that because I've seen Catholic priests use this argument too. Well, for them, he's not saying it isn't, but for them, it's just as natural. But
But nature is not for a portion of humanity. That which is natural is not for some of humanity. So I don't think that that's possible to. Maybe they feel that, maybe subjectively they think that, but that's delusional.
right. Right. I mean, people that maybe have perverse sexual desires, for them, it seems natural for them.
Yeah, yeah,
So what?
sure.
So what? So what?
Yeah.
Does that mean it's okay?
So I feel like I feel like I should be able to subject people to my desires and whims. It feels like that just comes up and or surges within me, and I have perfectly justified to become angry and hit them if they don't do my will. I mean, we can apply that across the board to all kinds of passions. So in and of itself, the subjective perspective of me or you or anybody else is really cannot become the test. It's not the standard. We can't act on that. There's a prototype. It's called Christ, and all the saints point to him. And how did they live and what did they do? That's where we begin to look at what's natural. This is a problem with their whole anthropology. What's natural is what's blessed by God and given by God, and what we see in the lives of the saints. What we're talking about here is subnatural or less than natural. So there's a whole anthropological problem here, the way they're looking at the fall. They're not even recognizing the effects and the impact of the fall, apparently, or they're taking that which has always been understood as a part of that and now putting it a part of the restoration. So now he's saying, well, that which we've always understood as a effect or a consequence of the fall, and something that is contrary to what God desires for us and does not lead us to theosis, we now consider to be consistent with theosis, communion, union. But on what basis does he say that? His own subjective experience, nothing else.
Exactly. Because he has a gay son.
And that's not to say that there are not many loving and compassionate priests who are accepting individuals, who approach them in honesty and about who they are and how they're living their lives. They're there, but they also feel isolated in this approach, that their pastoral approach that they're taking to the people that are coming to them. So I want to sort of finish up by talking about the kind of people that I've encountered. So unfortunately, there are those who have left the church feeling rejected and hurt and have decided that the fight to stay outweighs the benefits for them.
I actually, because I've had conversations with, I don't know any same-sex attracted Orthodox people, but I've actually had talked with Catholic people who identify as LGBT and have left the church. And I think it's the more honest thing to do, because if you feel so strongly about this identity and you feel that, religion wants to be a part of that, then I think the best thing for you to do is leave. And I would tell people, I would say, hey, if you want to get married in a church with stained glass windows, go to the Anglicans. They'll do it. I
At
think
this
that,
point,
I think that, yeah,
yeah,
I
I
think
don't know
that,
what to say at that point.
I think
We're
the
extremely superficial.
I think the dishonest thing is to stay and say, well, I'm going to fight for change. And that's what they've done.
Yes, I agree with that. Yes. Look, there are many things that people you have two choices: stay and submit and struggle to submit yourself to Christ because you understand him to be the healer, the beginning and end of all things, and the only one who can heal you. And even though you can't understand it, you submit yourself. Let's go to the gospel just a minute, just to understand what that would look like. Because again and again, this passage of the scriptures is very applicable today, because we have regardless of the issue. So we don't have we're going to apply it now to this question we're examining, but it's really across the board. We have the same stance. The Lord turns to his disciples and others, his 12, and then there were others that were following. And he turns and he says, "You must eat my body and drink my blood." And he goes on. Everybody knows the passage. And he goes on, and they're questioning, some of them, and they're saying, "Well, this is a hard saying. How can he say such a thing?" So, they're thinking rationally and fleshly. They're not thinking spiritually. And so it says in the scripture, this is a hard saying. They turned away. They could no longer follow him at that point. And he turns to his disciples and say, "Will you also turn away?" And so you see two amazing things here. The Lord respects the freedom of every human being, does not push in the slightest, does not push them to stay. Allows them to free, doesn't even say, "Wait a minute, no, come back. I can explain things. Let me unpack this for you in a rational way that you can understand it." He doesn't do that, because it's a test of trust. You have to trust the Lord if you're going to be his disciple. And Peter responds and says, "Where will we go? You have the words of life." He crucifies his intellect. He can't understand possibly what the Lord's talking about. It's not possible at that point to understand this is a spiritual reality. He's talking about the Eucharist or anything. So he has to crucify his mind at that point, very likely, and say, "I don't understand, but I follow you because you have the words of eternal life." So that's what it is to every one of us on many levels every day. But how much more on these major doctrinal, levels, questions of ethos and dogma, which is really what's at stake here. We have to choose. Are we going to be like the disciples, crucify our intellect and follow, and in due time we will be healed and be elevated spiritually to enter into the mystery of Christ? Or are we going to put Christ under the microscope of our irrational intellect and say he doesn't understand, or I need to understand him, and it has to be on a rational level, like logical level? Well, okay, well, that's not how it is. That's not what that function of the soul is made for. You're not supposed to put God under the microscope. He's above and beyond that. You have to submit to that. So this is the rationalism of our age. Everything, the gospel is being put before us, and we're going to rework it, reshape it to fit us, as opposed to us come under and be healed and transformed and transfigured. And so that's what sounds like is going on here. You know what this priest wants? It seems like to me, if we're going to take this analysis, he wants to be Apostle Peter and analyze it analytically and logically, and Christ to say, "You're right. I got it wrong." It's all reconcilable, and healing can come in the way you're talking about.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious too about what he's saying about people who've left the church, whether it's Catholic or Orthodox. I mean, what do you do with somebody that's obstinate, let's say, in their sin, and they say, if it's a man, "Well, I'm not going to stop cheating on my wife. I have a mistress and I'm keeping her," or I'm going to keep taking drugs. I don't care. Or I'm in a same-sex relationship and I'm going to keep having sex with people of the same sex. What do you do with somebody that's that obstinate? And I mean, they can't receive the sacraments, but
the stance of the church is always going to be pedagogical and therapeutic, but there are such cases where that pedagogy and that therapy is going to be, like the Apostle Paul says in one of his epistles, where he says he left the person because they were so obstinate to Satan, right? And so basically they're choosing, they're free. You have to respect their freedom, first of all. Then nothing's going to happen by force. So if they don't want to be a disciple of Christ, that's okay. You don't have to be. God, on many occasions, the Lord allowed the people to turn away from him and did not pressure them in the least. Look at the rich man who he said, "This is what you can do. Sell everything and be my disciple." He walked away. The Lord didn't chase after him and try to dumb down the gospel. He didn't try to make it easy for him and safe place so he can feel that he can be rich and a disciple. He let him go.
Yeah.
And he turns to his disciples. It's very hard for the rich men to enter the kingdom.
Yeah.
This is where a lot of people don't get. The priests try to be more caring and loving and big-hearted than Christ, but it's just pride on our part. It's not really therapeutic or humility. People are free, so you let them be. You pray for them, you intercede for them, and you wait for their return. That's what you have to do, because people are free to walk away from Christ, and you're not God to make it easy for them and dumb down the gospel for them. It's not you're not charged with that. I'll say this and then we can move on. People often come to the priest and say, Father, we have to do X, Y, Z to make the church grow, to make the this, make that. And the answer should be for the priest, no, that's not our role here. Our role is to be faithful.
Yeah.
And then Christ brings the people who are searching for truth. That's the role of the priest, to be faithful, not to become a marketing agent or become, whatever it is that people think they should be doing today. And, a safe place for psychologically impaired people. No, that's not what the priest's role is. Chiefly, it's to be faithful, to teach the truth, present Christ unadulterated, and they will be healed if they submit themselves to Christ.
Amen.
There are those who are disappointed, and yet they stay in the church, hoping for more openness and praying for a change, but they simply
praying for a change.
Yeah,
that is not a good reason to stay in a religion. And I told gay Catholics that. I was like, well, you know what? I was dead. I was very wrong, Father, because not even I saw what was coming down the pike. Because I remember I had a conversation. This was with a drag queen, and he was saying, well, we really do believe that the church is going to change. And with Francis, this drag queen said, I think it is changing. I was like, no. I said, you're kidding yourself. I said, the Catholic, but it did in my lifetime. So I was wrong there. So I think, I definitely worked in the Catholic Church. So you can't underestimate the influence and power that, let's say, the LGBT Christians, Orthodox Catholics have in the religion.
I
Because
think it's very naive among Orthodox Christians if we think that those trends and those distortions and upheavals that we're seeing among the heterodox we're immune from them, or we're impervious to that. People are free. Orthodox people are free, and they are free to choose to walk away from Christ. So people who say, well, I just stay in the church just to be obedient, blind obedience. Actually, no, that's not true. No, the church will always remain. The church will be in the earth until the second coming. There will be saints hidden probably from most of people until the second coming. It doesn't mean you and I will be in it. Right? Being faithful and submitting ourselves to the Christ and the saints, that is essential if we want to remain in the church. Look at North Africa, for instance. There was a vibrant church there with many martyrs. It doesn't exist. You can point out many places in the Christian world from the Orthodox perspective that applies to heterodox confessions in the West. There is no Orthodox church. There hasn't been in those places or until recently for 1,000 years. Just because you think or you say, I'm going to be in the church, it's a constant struggle of vigilance and faithfulness to what's been handed down. And yeah.
especially when you're funded by the Jesuits, because they have limitless resources. I mean, they've paid out millions in child sex abuse settlements. And
why is it that the Jesuits are at the forefront? I immediately have this tendency to think that it has a lot to do with what they did throughout those years. We in the Orthodox East, we have a very bitter experience with the Jesuits coming and trying to poach Orthodox, undermine Orthodoxy, subject Orthodoxy for hundreds of years. Is this the fruit of this kind of underhanded, very deceitful way?
I think so.
Do you think that that's all connected, and why we're seeing the Jesuits being so destructive?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not an expert on them, thank God, although I was abused by Jesuit priests. But the in their original, the founding, they were organized or designed to, I don't want to say infiltrate, but they were specifically, designed or organized in terms of educating the elite. and that's why they're so involved with universities. Fordham, Georgetown. What's the one up in Boston? Boston College.
Mhm.
Um, so that's very much part of their charism is education, but specifically education around the elite. That's why I mean Biden goes to a Jesuit um, parish up in DC. And if you look at a lot of politicians, they went specifically Catholic, but a lot of non-Catholic, they went to Jesuit universities. So, there's an interest among the Jesuits in influencing, larger, uh, you know, movements in society, and homosexuality is one of them. And I think I've never met a straight Jesuit. They're predominantly gay. So that's a real area that they have personal interest in as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, the Jesuits are evil. I mean, they were suppressed by their own church at one point. Let's see. I think we got a couple more minutes.
refuse to let go of the faith that is theirs. And they have the determination and fortitude to stay and live with that clash of values.
Hmm.
And I have to say, as a priest, I have to live with that same clash of values. And I'm struggling with that sometimes. And then there are those who are deeply
So he just admitted what we talked about earlier.
condemnation and rejection of harsh rhetoric by clergy and family.
Harsh
And
rhetoric.
this trauma can also apply to family members and allies of the LGBTQ plus persons. Some of these family members and friends remain in the church, and others also have decided to leave. And so this is a problem for us. There are success stories that we've collected along the way as couples who have been accepted by their priests and communities, their priests and the communities, and who have enjoyed the blessings of a life in the Orthodox Church with communities that know who these couples are, and they've embraced them, and it's a beautiful thing.
So let me say something, Joseph.
Somehow,
So this is the absolute worst outcome for everyone. Because the worst possible thing is to think that you're being healed and in the church and faithful when you're not, because there's so little room for coming to self-knowledge after that. This is the satanic methodology of the age that we see in ecumenism, for instance, that they crushed it. And this is the same thing applying here in so many ways. The devil is destroying the wall, right? We can see this in immigration. We see this all over the place. It's political, social, sexual, ecclesiastical. The methodology, the demonic methodology is to destroy the wall, the boundary. So therefore, there'll be no way to return. Nobody will understand where to return to. Everything will resemble the same as one, whole. And so I can be Orthodox and yet be a uniate, or be a Latin, and I can be in communion, and we're going to have a union. There's so many examples we could go through society where the destruction of the boundaries that God has put down is the demonic methodology, and that leads to the worst possible outcome, which is people thinking they're on the path of salvation when they're not, being affirmed in that when they're not, and that is the blind leading the blind into the pit. Remember that the very term used by the Holy Fathers and the ecumenical councils for the decisions of the ecumenical councils was boundary, the ordio, the decision means boundaries. It's the Lord is laying down the boundaries of what it is to be an Orthodox Christian. You cannot be outside those if you want to be on the path of salvation. They're blurring it, and they're to the point where no one can know, am I far? Am I in? Am I out? It's the most satanic methodology, and it's everywhere today.
Yeah. And what this priest means by harsh rhetoric is just stating what it has been taught concerning homosexuality. So if you're saying that, well, in terms of Catholicism, I remember specifically that they were saying, well, if you say that this desire is disordered, that's harsh rhetoric.
Yes, it's apparent. I mean, The question I would ask him if I was sitting in front of him, so would it be harsh rhetoric to tell someone what St. Paul says in his
Yes.
epistle?
Yes, it
Is
is.
that harsh rhetoric? I think he
Yes,
would
it
say
is.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
I
Because
mean, it's can you get any harsher? It says they will not inherit the kingdom of heaven.
they get in, he gets into that later, but I'm not going to play that.
Okay.
Sometimes as well, I know that these situations can still feel tentative because of the potential tenure of their priest or the parish makeup. And so unfortunately, again, in our environment that has been fostered is that there's almost an outright fear to like highlight these success stories because of the chance of outside criticism or pressure to discipline the couple or perhaps the priest. So my hopes for us going forward is that we begin to explore a new Orthodox perspective, one within our Orthodox framework.
So Joseph,
I thought that was interesting, a new Orthodox perspective.
yeah. What that is apostasy and heresy. Forgive me, but if we had a normal and healthy reality in his diocese or his bishop, he would have been defrocked. What he's doing publicly, teaching the undermining the church's teaching and telling us to overturn it, essentially, is worthy of defrocking. He's not worthy of the priesthood at that point.
No.
It's not his. I can't stand up and say I think we ought to change the teaching of the church that's been held since time immemorial, and then continue to function as a priest. I've walked away from my commitment and my call and my duty at that point. I don't understand, but we have a very grave crisis among at least some in the hierarchy in some jurisdictions, and that goes on, and it's just going to get sicker and weaker in those places. And as long as people around that don't do anything, and it will not be sufficient for the, if you stand in a parish and that's happening and you do nothing, you are part of the problem.
Yep.
You're part of the problem.
I agree. Let me read.
I think it needs to be said. I didn't want to say it, but I think at the end you need to say that. He's in apostasy and he's teaching heresy.
I know
Yeah.
that these situations can still feel
Oh, come on.
tentative, or perhaps the priest. So my hopes for us going forward is that we begin to explore a new Orthodox perspective, one within our Orthodox framework of addressing tough questions, but willing to apply contemporary anthropology, science, and psychology to provide grace and economia, leniency for the LGBTQ plus people and their relationships that have long been a part of the fabric of human relationships. And I think I'm really thankful for Dr. Rich, who has done great work with his book.
Yeah, they haven't been a part of a rich.
Well, certainly not a part of the Orthodox Christian teaching and experience, but
well, let me interrupt you real quick, Father. This article, which is very good, goes into the history of homosexuality and people like identifying as homosexual acts have been going on for forever. That's true, but that doesn't mean that people have identified by that. That's very modern. That's very new.
Yes, good point.
So he's full of it there. That's not true what he's saying. So,
but regardless of what's happened among pagans or among others, he's talking about within the Orthodox framework. There's nothing in the Orthodox framework that would adopt a new anthropology.
Yeah.
Why are we going to look to a contemporary anthropology? He said, that's apostasy. The contemporary anthropologies are expressing the one Holy Catholic and Apostolic Church's experience of what it means to be a restored human being, to be communion, to be God by grace. No, they're not even remotely in that realm. So why would we sit at the feet of contemporary anthropologies and science and rethink what we know to be the healed, the restored, the regenerated, the transfigured man? No, it's not going to come from this earth.
Because I think this comes from Catholic humoretics, or what do we call that interpretation, is that the Bible is has to be read within a historical context. So within that historical context, people in the first millennium, whatever, didn't understand the modern conception of homosexuality like we understand today, because we are informed, like what he's saying, by psychological insights and these new, insights that
But
we
we don't, but that's irrelevant because Christ understood the human person.
well,
Christ
gee,
and the saints understood the human person. And the teaching we're talking about comes from him and his apostles and disciples. What people thought or did not think 2,000 or 1,000 years ago is irrelevant. I mean, they want to put Christian teaching into some kind of limited human scope and framework, but that's not what we've been
yeah.
received. If that's all we received, then what are we doing
Well,
in the church?
they said in this presentation that, Scripture at one point advocated for slavery. So we, as a
What
human, the human race, humanity in general, has
is that
moved
true? That the
moved beyond that.
Scripture advocated for it? No, that's a misreading in my understanding. It didn't advocate. It said this is a reality, and
Well,
within this
certainly
reality,
it was certainly accepting of it.
yeah, but it said, yeah, because they were not able to overturn it. They didn't have any kind of ability to overturn it. They were a small minority. St. Paul
Right.
was talking, and others in those centuries were talking about how to deal with it. It was a reality all around the world. And so how do you save your souls within it? And but to advocate is very different.
Okay.
To advocate that we should be slaves to one to another, no, I don't think the
Okay.
church has ever advocated for it.
Okay. Because in that presentation from Fordham, they talked about, because you mentioned the admonitions from St. Paul, is that they were saying, and this is a quote, those refer to subjugation and slavery within homosexual uh, uh, relationships. So I think this comes from Catholicism, because here's James Martin speaking about
Okay, let's hear it.
that
One ministry
topic.
is 3-year public ministry. Jesus
Let's see.
A little bit louder.
understand
Sorry,
the
Father.
phenomenon of homosexuality and
Okay.
bisexuality, I would say, as we do today.
Let me.
In Corinthians text
Here we go.
condemning to persons. Francisco is asking, how can one respond to persons citing Leviticus and Corinthians text condemning homosexuality?
Yeah, so all these Bible passages that people throw at you, I think really need to be understood in their historical context, right? I mean, Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and even the stuff from the New Testament where Paul talks about it, once or twice, has to be understood in the historical context. Right? The Bible is written in a particular time. It's the inspired word of God, but it is written certainly in a particular time and in a particular historical context. Certainly in Old Testament times, they didn't understand the phenomenon of homosexuality and bisexuality, I would say, as we do today. I also like to say that there's a lot of other stuff in Leviticus that we, sort of understand in its historical context, like what kind of slaves can we have, that kind of stuff. Whether or not we can wear certain kinds of clothes, whether or not our crops can be next to one another. We don't look at those passages in an ahistorical way, so why should we look at passages on homosexuality in that way? And I'd also like to say that in his long ministry, his 3-year public ministry, Jesus says nothing about the topic. So when people use those arguments at you...
All right. So let's talk about this. So the historical context argument. I mean, this is not this is not one or twice or two. First of all, it's not once or twice in the history of humanity. We have Sodom and Gomorrah. We have the Lord referring to Sodom and Gomorrah. So it's wrong. He makes a mistake here. The Lord referred to it and clearly acknowledged that it was a reality and that God punished them. And so the idea that the church here and there have historically limited perspectives is nonsense. And the church has been consistent for 2,000 years, saint after saint after saint. The revelation is not limited in the Orthodox Church. Revelation is not limited to only that which is written in the scriptures, because God does not stop speaking to his people and has been speaking to the saints and through the saints and through the ecumenical councils for 2,000 years. We're not like we're not like waking up from a stupor of 1,000 years of ignorance to for science to enlighten us what it means to be saved, what it means to be healed. That's what's ultimately at stake here. What they want to make it about is opinions or statements about homosexuality. What's always at stake is what does it mean to be healed? What does it mean to be whole? What does it mean to be regenerated, transfigured? Because that's what you're implying here, that's reconcilable with sodomy, with homosexuality, and with probably a lot of other things that the society is going to be pushing soon, undoubtedly. Is that the truth? The church has answered this again and again and again. The fathers of the saints, the scriptures are not silent. This is just not honest, what he's saying here.
It isn't. And going back to that Fordham presentation, I was looking at my notes. Um, the young lady who spoke, and I have to say I've seen this in the Catholic Church as well, is that they often pick a lesbian to represent sort of the gay community, and I think this is very dishonest too, because you saw this in the lead up to Obergefell, where Ellen DeGeneres sort of became the face of homosexuality or the gay community or whatever, this sort of gender asexual woman. And it's very misrepresentative because lesbians have nothing to do with what's going on with gay men. And she said in that Fordham presentation, it's not about who you love, but how you love. She said that. And the other thing she talked about was making people feel loved and safe in a church. And again, I wanted to reiterate that I don't think that's the job of a religion to make people feel loved and safe. I think especially
Well,
for
not in
people.
that sense of love, not in what she thinks love is, which is
No,
sentimental and fleshly. What is
yeah,
love in the Christian church? It's the cross. Crucifixion is love for us.
yeah,
And that means laying down our life for others and sacrificing for others. This is extremely narcissistic and egotistical
yeah,
today, that this whole society is driven by self-love.
yeah,
And when you say we're not about making people safe, what you really mean is we're not about affirming you in your self-love.
yeah,
We're about curing you of your self-love,
yeah,
right? The distorted, egotistical, focused love.
yeah,
So yeah, there's so much here that needs to be backtracked. There's so many things that are not stated that we've lost on the way. We've arrived at these kind of conclusions and these kind of biases and these kind of perspectives. We're far from, we need to restart, like go back to the beginning and rethink things. We haven't been catechized as an
yeah.
Orthodox Christian.
And that queer theoretician that they had there as well, he talked about the church, that the church should be welcoming, and it should be gay people should be embraced and accepted. So the issue I take with that is that anybody who's coming from some sort of self-destructive mindset, really the opposite should be true. You should feel uncomfortable, you should feel challenged, and you should really feel the desire to change. So I don't think the most important thing is to feel loved and accepted and
But
embrace
the Lord
and
didn't go
and,
around.
and
The Lord
embrace.
didn't. The Lord didn't go around and in a sentimental, sappy, fleshly way say, "Everybody come unto me, and I'll love you." In a sentimental, sappy way. What did he say? He said, "All those who be my disciples, pick up their cross and follow after me."
Yeah,
So now you're telling us that the crucifixion of the flesh and the desires and all this stuff is no longer really a prerequisite for being his disciple. We can embrace those desires and those relationships which are not has not been revealed by God and taught by the saints as consistent with crucifixion, which is the only way you're going to arrive at real love. I mean, they talk about love today and has nothing to do with love. It has
yeah,
nothing to do with the love of God and the love that comes through crucifixion, which frees us from the self-love, restores us in communion, I don't know, extensive catechism necessary to reestablish what do we mean here by these terms we're throwing around, because I don't think
Yeah.
we mean the same thing.
No. And as somebody coming from that world or that space, I think once you challenge yourself and you really take a hard look and re-examine your life, I think then you will be able to accept love at that point. I think if you're still deep within your addiction and your sin, I think it's kind of impossible. So
But if that's true with anything though, right?
yeah,
Not just homosexuality or
I
sodomy or
agree.
whatever it is that we're engaged in.
I agree.
So there's no, contrary to what they're saying, there's no harsh rhetoric or no, we're not being mean, or we're not trying to single out people. We're not trying to reject a particular person. Everyone is called, but few are chosen. In other words, everyone is called. We're all free to become disciples, but we become disciples when we decide to pick up the cross. And so the Lord came into the world, and what did he say? The prophecy, it'll be a sign to be spoken against. In other words,
Mm.
his presence divides, not because he divides, but because we choose or don't choose him. And therefore we
Hmm.
depart from him and go into one side, or we follow him.
Yeah,
And we're free to do that, right? We're free not to follow
yeah,
him. And
yeah.
so they were interpreting this presence of Christ. Basically they're saying, I don't like this version of Christ that's been handed down to us for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
I want to distort that so that I can serve both masters. I can have my foot in two worlds.
Hmm.
I can be reconciled without being reconciled, essentially.
Hmm. I agree. I'll try to wind down, Father. One last thing about that Fordham conversation is that one of the things I heard this in Catholicism a lot, is they talk about the need for dialogue, beginning a conversation, all of these things. And what they mean by that, because I've tried to be a part of these sort of dialectics or group, whatever conversations they have. Real quick, as an anecdote, when Archbishop Cordileone first came to San Francisco, and he had a reputation of being not LGBT affirming and pretty traditional. So he was a stupid guy. So one of the things he did was he set up these like struggle sessions with the Catholic LGBT groups in San Francisco, and there was a number of them. And of course, I wasn't invited, but I heard from people that went, and it was just the gay Catholics haranguing him about, how the church had to be more accepting and welcoming and safe and all of this stuff. And I was like, this is what they're calling for, even in Orthodoxy, in that context when they say we want a conversation, we want to have a dialogue, we want to have a discourse with you.
Yeah.
It means we want a struggle section. We want to come forward and say how you've hurt us, how you've offended us, how we've been traumatized, and how you need to change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's obvious. And if they were truly coming to sit and learn from the saints, they wouldn't need anything. Just go. It's all there. You can do that. Go learn like everybody else
Yeah.
what it means to be a regenerated, saved human being. It's all there in the saints. There's no need. So they're clearly saying we need to change the church, meaning my parish, my diocese, all the people. They're never going to change the word of God. They're never going to change the patristic teachings and ecumenical councils and all the rest, the canons. That's not changeable. So they just want to ignore that, act like it doesn't exist, and change their own world. And all they're going to do is fall away from orthodoxy in doing that.
Yeah.
Because again, methodologically, they're not even approaching Christ and the church in the way the Orthodox approach Christ and the church. So from the get-go, they're gonna miss the mark.
And isn't homosexuality sort of a settled issue? So
Yeah.
why do they want to keep returning to it? So they don't.
That's the methodology of incrementalism and essentially contemporary demonic methodology of distortion and overturning. If you go back just real quick, because I could talk for a long time on this, but this is really interesting. If you go back to the garden and the snake and the serpent rather, and Adam and Eve, right? So what's the methodology there? The demonic methodology recognized. You have basically 3 or 4 stages. The first thing is coexistence. The second thing is dialogue, right? He had to be there, then he had to open up a dialogue with Adam and Eve, and then infiltration into their thoughts and then overturning their thoughts, and then the action, right?
Yeah.
That's the stages of temptation, the demonic that the fathers talk about. And so what we see here is a demonic methodology at work. It's not submission. Like when the apostles went to the Lord, they didn't question him in the way that the others questioned him, like who's your authority? I mean, what authority do you teach? They said, help us to understand. That's a dialogue, or if you want to call it a dialogue, it's more like a desire for a clarification and a better understanding. That's blessed. That we do that in the church. We go sit at the feet of the saints and the elders and the bishops and the fathers, and we say, teach us, help us understand. We don't understand. That's not what they're doing. They're coming and saying, let's do a dialogue on basically like, you need to listen to us and we need to make changes here. So they're not approaching again as the saints and the fathers and the apostles approach the Lord. It's not how they're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to share a couple other things with you
Sure.
before we call it a day. This is just an aside. It's something that it has become particularly important to me. And as far as I know, I'm the only person to sort of aggregate all of these studies. So I was interested in the connection between same-sex attraction and childhood sexual abuse. So, I did find a lot of studies, some of them fairly recent, which found a very high correlation. And people will say that that doesn't mean causation, but I mean, I actually think it does. So, what I found is that the majority, specifically of gay men, were had same-sex molestation as children. So that was one of the odd things in that Fordham presentation that struck me too, is that right away, I think they start from a false premises, is that homosexuality is just a given. You're born that way. There's no attempt to understand it in a more complex way. So I reject their fundamental premise, which is,
Well, they're not. To be able to approach it in this way would be to admit that it's a distortion and a problem, and therefore we're looking for the cause. But they don't see it as a distortion or problem, so they're not looking for a cause. But I would say this is totally consistent with what we're seeing on all kinds of levels. People come to me all the time with a great insecurity in confession or whatever, and they're talking to us and they're saying, I have these, and they describe all these anxiety and where does that come from? Actually, a lot of times it comes from their childhood. It comes from the way that they were raised. It comes from their mother and father, their brother and sister, some kind of abuse. Absolutely. Many of the most acute spiritual sicknesses that you see today in adults is because of something that happened when they were children or young adults, and they never were healed of it, never dealt with it. Now it's become a real issue. So I think that this is consistent with our understanding of all spiritual illnesses and sicknesses.
I agree. Thank you, Father. Let's see. So I just wanted to get your reaction to some of these things, because it sort of flies in the face of what that priest and that whole panel was actually arguing. I thought this was interesting because I think the premise of their ministry to Orthodox people who identify as LGBT is that if we're more affirming, more loving, more accepting, that a lot of these issues will sort of take care of themselves. This was a study done in the Netherlands, which I had to do some research on the Netherlands. It was the very first country to legalize same-sex marriage. It's very LGBT affirming. But despite the Netherlands' reputation as a world leader with respect to gay rights, homosexual Dutchmen have much higher rates of mood disorders, anxiety disorders, suicide attempts than heterosexual Dutch men. So it kind of blows up their premise that if the world would just be more accepting, all of these problems would resolve themselves. Because
Yeah.
the priest did in that Fordham talk did use the term that Orthodox gay people are traumatized because of what's going on. But I don't think that trauma has anything to do with what they hear in church.
Well, if it's a good, Elder Paisius talks about the good uneasiness that we all need to instill in people, the good uneasiness. And so there's a very good and necessary uneasiness that we need to have with regard to sin, with regard to delusion, with
Yeah.
regard to our distance from the natural, what God intended for us, which is
Mm.
theosis, right? So that never leaves us. It's different kinds of uneasiness. That's healthy. That's blessed. And so, but that's not what we're talking about here. The uneasiness and the trauma that they have there is that they don't want to embrace and understand that they're distant and they need to repent, they need to return, and that this is an obstacle to the communion with God. They want to ignore that. And this what you're talking about is absolutely consistent with what we would expect
Um,
as Orthodox Christians.
yeah. And people are traumatized too, is because their their childhood trauma or their sexual abuse
Yes.
has been uh, sort of crystallized or solidified in them into an identity.
They're gonna say, look, now that you're telling me that I have this problem, you're blaming me, essentially, right? And so I think that's what they think, that the church is saying, uh, not recognizing maybe that actually I've been abused or I've been distorted or I've been misled. And so pastorally, it's perfectly good for a priest to say, this is inconsistent with theosis, with salvation.
Hmm.
How and why you came to this, we can examine, and let's find the roots, let's find the problems. But the therapy is going to be the same, generally speaking. You need to be healed. I need to be healed. You're as long as you cling to this, you can't be united in communion with God.
Hmm.
Why, how you got there? That we're not implying anything until let's examine it. I mean, so I think there's room to definitely for a priest to work with them, absolutely, with all people who are fallen and sinful. But if I came with any sickness I have, I come to the church and say, I don't need to be healed of this. This is not inconsistent with theosis. And the priest is expected to say, you're right, and ignore everything in the church and say this is a part of your. I mean, where does that happen, and what other sin does that happen? What other passion or sickness does that happen? Doesn't happen.
It doesn't know. This is a suicide. I thought this was interesting because this is suicide attempts in married couples in Sweden. So it is greater, and Sweden is another very LGBT affirming country. So even among men who are married, these problems persist. So
It's tragic. Tragic.
yes, yeah. So even if, say, the Orthodox churches started marrying same-sex people, would that necessarily help them? No.
No. As I
Bec
said earlier, it would make it worse.
yeah, there's underlying issues.
It would make it worse. It would identify two things that are totally opposed. That would make it as if they're united. It would destroy the boundary, and therefore it would forever condemn people to not being able to come to self-knowledge and not be able to come to union with God. I mean, it's the worst possible scenario. And it's not love, it's
Mm-mm.
not compassion, it's not healing.
No, it says here the risk of suicide was higher among same-sex married individuals as compared to different sex married
Threefold greater. That's not a
individuals.
little
Yeah,
bit. That's
yeah,
massive.
yeah. A comparison of sexual behavior patterns among men who have sex with men and heterosexual men and women. This I kind of wanted to go back to what that priest had said. The desire that they have for love and intimacy and sex is just as natural for them as it is for straight people. So there's no difference. So I picked one cohort out of this study. It was the 35 to 39-year olds because I kind of figure nowadays those are the people that are kind of settling down and getting married. So MSM means men who have sex with men. So among gay men, 72% in that age cohort had new sexual partners in a given year. So the vast majority. So if you compare that to men, heterosexual men, it was 21%, and among heterosexual women, it was 10%.
Yeah. So
So is it the same as straight people?
no, no. Yeah. Um,
I sounds like I'm beating up on people, but well, the facts of
mm,
relationship of factors associated with HIV risk among a sample of gay male couples. This was interesting because it was in San Francisco. Yeah, this is well, I don't want to. This is what they do. So people can look up UAI if they would like.
yeah, I don't know if I don't know if I want to.
This is relationship characteristics and motivations. So what I found interesting about this study and why I wanted to sort of bounce it off what that priest was saying is that even within married couples or so-called monogamous gay male couples, the majority of them are actually open relationships where they permit sex with outside people outside the relationship. So is it, I'd go to that priest, is it, you said it's just like straight people. So is it?
No. It's so tragic that the hospital and the doctors are telling people you don't need to be healed. Go
Yeah.
back, you're okay. Stay as you are.
Yeah.
And they have cancer.
Yeah.
This is
Well,
what we're doing.
well, Father, that's why they won't put me on a panel like that at Fordham. So this is also immune. This is just fundamentally why it's detrimental to your health. Immune responses to spermatozoa in homosexual men. So people can look that up and read about it. Um,
Hmm.
I'll let people read that. So,
Okay.
so that priest again at Fordham, is it just like straight people?
No, no,
Well,
clearly.
here's what's going on in the Catholic Church, Father.
Yeah.
The thing about that's kind of shocking about this image, it's about 5 years old. So
Hmm.
this was going on way before whatever that thing Francis issued. So
So he's just responding to what's already happening on the ground and probably among some of his own people in the Vatican and all the rest, right?
yeah, more stuff from the Catholic Church. Paulus Fathers,
Whoa. What does it
uh,
mean?
Father Gill and Father Eric's 25th anniversary party. So it was these guys aren't priests, but it was some priest party. I don't know. They had these gay guys on there with their kids. So it was kind of weird.
Okay, so their anniversary party is this is implied that they've been married or whatever together for 25 years, these two priests.
I don't know.
God have mercy.
I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not sure about that. So this is some of the other stuff that goes on that's sort of bizarre.
What was
The
that? What was that
the
picture we just saw? Was that?
gay mass.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. Just okay. Wow.
Looks like fun. This was one of the worst things I ever found. Was this was a Catholic church in New York City, and they were uh, recommending this particular hospital for people that want to get
Mm,
sex reassignment surgeries.
my goodness. How can anyone recognize Christ in any of this?
I don't
It's so far away from Christ.
I don't know. I
This is
wanted, yeah, I wanted to kind of, I kept you too long. I wanted to end with this, Father. Is it, when I became Orthodox, um, one of my Catholic friends had asked me, well, and they were sincere. They said, does the Orthodox Church have any like specific like LGBTQ ministries? Because when I was Roman Catholic, a lot of my writing had to do with sort of exposing these heterodox LGBTQ ministries that, were in the Catholic Church that were very similar to what that panel we saw at Fordham, which were advocating, change in the church and welcoming and love and safe spaces and all this stuff. And but I was also involved with a group called Courage, which is a much more small O Orthodox group, which advocated, for celibacy and uh, 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 following the teachings of the Catholic Church in terms of homosexuality. And the group was good in that perspective, but there were other issues with it that I didn't like, specifically just because they were sort of I mean, they were grouping people with same-sex attraction together into a ministry, which I don't particularly like. I think people with that issue should be well, now I'm answering my own question. I think people with that issue should be ministered to on an individual basis, not as a group, because I think when you do it as a group, I think it tends to confirm the identity because you're already
This is typical of the difference between an Orthodox pastoral approach and a non-Orthodox and mainly a Latin or papal
okay.
approach. And
That
that is
was
that,
that was my question, Father. So
yeah, I
what?
think that it's always going to be almost always going to be one-on-one spiritual father, priest, confessor, and those who are coming to be restored to Christ in communion. And so it's going to be in the time of confession. And the differs, Orthodox churches and traditions differ a little bit about how often and where and how, but basically essentially the same. It's the same therapeutic program that all the priests are following. And so no, it's going to be a one-on-one, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. Uh, First and foremost, everyone's different, and everyone has different circumstances. And secondly, uh, when you put people together and they talk about passions, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. It doesn't. Sit around and let's talk about the various passions I have. No, bad idea. It's not going to be. It's going to be sick and probably incur passion less than not heal people of passion. So yeah, we don't do that, and I don't know of any ministry like that. And if we do have, if something like that is created, and maybe they exist and I don't know about it, but if it is created, it's not an Orthodox way to approach things.
That was my question. So would even if this ministry was following the church's teachings in terms of
Yeah,
homosexuality,
yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. No.
I don't
The
either.
doctor doesn't, generally the doctor's going to have you in his office, going to tell you what your particular problem, right? Maybe he'll get together with 3 or 4 other doctors to consult, and maybe they even might come and talk to you once or something, but generally it's a one-on-one doctor-patient relationship. That's what we're doing.
Mhm, mhm. And then the one thing I wanted to I think you had already stated it a few times, but I just wanted to emphasize it again, is the and I've had this conversation with Catholic people who have, gay kids. And I always turn to the parable of the prodigal son. And I've read it, many, many times, and I've studied it, and I've sort of contemplated each word in that parable because I think it's important in this context. And the father always fascinated me too, is that the father let the boy go. He let him leave because at some point, because what these people at Fordham were kept saying is you have to be affirming, you have to be loving, and you have to be accepting. But is it loving when you enable someone to persist in an activity that is detrimental to them? In
No,
No.
no, and he'd already left in his soul and in his mind.
Yeah.
He was restless. He wanted out. He wanted the money. The minute he came to give him the money, he's gone. He's already gone. To keep him there is pointless and destructive. He needs to go. He needs to live his freedom, use his freedom, see how the poor use of his freedom, where it leads. It leads to the pigsty, and it leads to alienation. And he has to then come, he needs to, you know, different people, different degrees of descent, but they need to come at some point to themselves. It says he came to himself. That self-knowledge is essential. And this is what I'm saying, that this whole, what we talked about tonight, the biggest destruction is that we're destroying the ability and we're not allowing them to come to self-knowledge, which is essential if they're going to come back to communion with God and God knowledge. You know, Greek, it's aphthousia and theognosia, right? Those two things are inseparable. So, and then the equivalent of what people are doing today is they want to say, look, you're in the pigsty, but no, you're not. You're actually in the house. But no, he's not. He's in the pigsty. And he has to, and there's a process of him coming to himself, getting up and returning. And that return is repentance. And the repentance is not a one-stop thing. It's not, I repented, I'm done. It's a continuous present, and it's a continuous eternal return to God's embrace. I mean, there's a demarcation line of communion again, but even that, it goes deeper and deeper into communion. But the Father was waiting for him. He can go into the pigsty and get dirty. In other words, he didn't identify with the sin. He didn't say, look, you're there, I'm here, come back, right? That's necessary. We have to get up and leave sin behind and come back and freely do that. We have to freely do that. We can't be pressured into it. We can't be coaxed into it. Again, these clergy who think that they can become holier and more loving than the Lord are just don't understand human freedom. They don't understand their role in the process of healing. And our role is not to add our own, sauce and confuse people. It's to let Christ shine and let Christ's words speak and let them confront Christ in us. And Christ will speak to them and Christ will heal them. And we get out of the way. But when you start and say, I've got to affirm them, I've got to keep them in, I've got to do X, Y, Z, I've got to dumb things down, I've got to store, then you're getting in the way. You're not helping anybody. You're getting in the way of the healing.
Yeah. You're enabling.
And so much of what these people are doing is getting in the way of the healing because they don't actually understand. They don't understand. They're not healed. First of all, probably most of them. We're all sick, but they're not in a position to heal other people if they're not healed. And that's why they're projecting and saying, no, you're not sick because they're also sick, right? That's what usually people do. Let's commiserate. So then beyond that, though, their methodology is not patristic and their results are going to be dismal in terms of real healing and restoration. It's tragedy what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I might seem harsh, but I can be that way because I'm not a priest. But I would rather have someone hear something harsh or traumatizing than something that like what they were advocating, which is this very squishy, wishy-washy stuff. Because I just, to give an example really quick, is it, when my life was really spinning out of control, is it, I did kind of keep my distance specifically from my father because I know he didn't approve. So, but at one point I did sort of things kind of spilled out and my dad really saw what was going on. And, he let me know about it in a way that I found to be very personally offensive. And, I walked out and that was it. So, but years later, I kind of remembered that because you sort of remember the person that is willing to tell you the hard truth than the person that's always just approving and enabling. So because people in specific, let's just talk about, because we're talking about these people, the LGBT community, or whatever we call it, they have a lot of people that are very affirming and loving and accepting, but they don't have people that are willing to tell them the hard truth.
Yeah, I would take issue with that. If you're not telling them the truth, you're not loving them.
Correct, Father. I was using the love as sort of in
Yeah,
terms of love is love.
Who do you remember? I'll say that. Who do I remember from high school? The teachers I remember from high school. The hard ones.
The tough ones, Joe.
The tough ones.
But you
Those
learned.
are the ones I remember. Not the ones that were easy on me and we got away with a lot and we passed the test with, really it should have been a C, but they gave me an A. And if I do remember them, I don't have them in high estimation anymore. Maybe it was good for that, year. I was happy that I got out of that class, but I don't look back at them and say, those are people that I really admire. The one that I admired was the hardest one, and he made me learn. He made it so I could learn. He
Yeah.
really helped me to get ahead, and he pushed my beyond the comfort zone. I mean, again, it comes back. Do you want to be healed? The Lord went to many people in the gospel, and one in particular that it stands out. It was 36 years as basically a paralyzed next to the water of the Siloam and Siloam, I think the pool of Siloam. And so he goes to them and says, "Do you want?" Knowing the Lord, knowing that he's been there for so many years, and knowing that he can't get into the water.
You want to be healed.
Do you want to be? He still asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" I mean, of course he wanted to be healed, but why did the Lord ask intentionally? Because he has to say yes. So that's the question of everybody, whether you got problems with same-sex attraction or not, whatever you are struggling with, do you want to be healed? And if you want to be healed, you got to go to Christ, and you got to lay down everything, not have any demands. You got to crucify your intellect. You got to crucify your desires, and you got to say, "Heal me." And that's the only way, no matter what you're struggling with. This is just what we just saw in these videos you saw is basically people saying, "Look, I don't want to be healed. I want you to accept me as I am, but I don't want to be healed." Well, that's not the church. The church doesn't do that.
No,
Never has, because we
No.
love you.
no.
That's why we don't
No.
do that.
That's a good way to end. And I wanted to say that I thought what particularly these people at Fordham were advocating is just a LGBT community center with icons. I didn't nothing that they were proposing was particularly Christian or
They
challenging
should be
about
very
it.
careful, because that's on the borderline, if not already blasphemy. You're gonna decorate sin with the trappings of orthodoxy. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, it sounds like that's what they want to do. And I hope that it's recognized for what it is. And
Well, the vast majority of the people in the church have turned away their face from such things. Believe me, in my experience, the people who are struggling to be Orthodox on the ground. The good news is that there's a ton of converts coming to Orthodoxy right now. I've been 30 years Orthodox, and I've heard this from many other priests that never seen so many people come into Orthodoxy. And a lot of those people are fleeing the kind of thing that we're talking about right here. So they're not going to embrace this in Orthodoxy.
no.
And they're going to become the priests tomorrow and the monks and the bishops someday. So I think that it's not the same dynamic that you saw in Catholicism at all in Orthodoxy. And that doesn't mean that we won't have serious problems.
Mhm.
Maybe we'll have apostasy, we'll have schism. I don't
Mhm.
know. God knows. All that's been going on for 2,000 years. That's not anything new. But these kind of challenges, we should expect that. And this is the day of heresy. We're living in the age of par excellence heresy like we've never seen before, right? Departures from Christ as the theanthropos, the God man. There's been never in 2,000 years have we seen so many various distortions and perversions today. So it would be very naive to think, oh, we're not going to have to deal with that, or the church is some kind of bastion. People are free in the church to walk away from the church, and that's happened 1,000 times. So that shouldn't, really impress us at all. We should just say, okay, well, they're free. We should be working tirelessly to teach. That's what we're missing today. There's not enough really proper Orthodox mystagogy, right? In initiation to the mystery, teaching of the faith. If that's what we're about and doing, and people are being initiated properly, catechized properly, baptized properly, all that, the threat is really annulled in a big way. But if we abandon those basic things, which are, as priests, we should be doing and doing very well, then yeah, we're going to initiate people. I mean, people are going to come into the church who aren't going to be healed, and they're going to become susceptible to that. I was going to say earlier, there's a rise in people who say I'm homosexual and lesbian because it's being cultivated today, right?
Yeah.
And people are trying it out, and people think it's trendy and all kinds of stuff. And so there are many more people who are going to come to the church having gone through these are truly traumatic experiences, right? That sully the soul and distort the person and all this stuff. That's what's really traumatic. And so the church is going to have to deal with this in a big way spiritually. But we have the medicine. right? We need to apply the medicine, and clergy as priests, especially, they're in the catechetical process. I talk about this all the time. This is the solution of so many of our problems. If priests would do proper catechism and proper initiation into the mysteries and have the presuppositions met, the church, we would get out of the way, Christ would be healing people, and people would be becoming deep in repentance in the Orthodox Church. And then they're really not susceptible to this. It's not impressive. Once we arrive at that kind of healing, then these things are tragic. We just look at them as tragic.
Amen. And I hope Father Seraphim Rose is praying for all of us.
He is indeed great example for all of us, of one who truly deeply repented and was healed in the church.
Yeah, I think he left all that at the door when he walked into the church. And I think as hard as it is for people to do, because they've taken all that on as an identity, I think you have to. You have to kind of just be washed off of all of that. And
he says, I've crucified my mind. I've crucified my mind. So that's key. That's key.
Yeah. And I think it's very unhelpful when these panels at Fordham, tell people that, this is who you are and this is how you're made and this is who God made you to be. And that, I just think it's unhelpful to people when
you're understated. You're very kind. It's not just helpful. It's destructive.
Okay, thank you.
It's an anti-gospel.
Yes, thank you, Father. I appreciate you taking so much time with me. Thank you.
May it help everybody who's listening. God bless.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you for having me.